whenever we give that question to instructional designers want definitions of this.
Yes.
Okay. So here's the thing. We're not going to explain it. We're going to let you take it to however you want, and then we'll talk more about it. We have the whole hour, but we're just going to go. You see, I also taught marketing. So top of the mind awareness, whatever comes to your mind without you being given any explanation. Yeah, go ahead, type it in chat. And I can tell you, we've done this before. We've got lots of different answers.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, the question was, do you believe there is a dominant tech culture? And I guess you have to kind of consider what you would think, you would assume what we mean by dominant at this point, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we do mean about dominant.
Maybe another way to look at it, if you close your eyes and envision people in tech, what do you envision? What's the culture you envision of the people?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Okay, that everyone loves social media. Okay. That could be definitely a part of tech culture. Access to internet, right? Access to that technology.
White males.
White males, we see that as well. Yep. Social class, yep. Okay, so, oops, let's see, click over here. What we're currently kind of defining as dominant tech culture is really the lack of representation of women and people of color in the creation, representation, and use of technology. So not only, like I said, in the creation, but also who is being seen as the client, who is being represented in the development and considered in the development of technology. And so we're going to discuss kind of ways in which we believe that technology is or isn't neutral. So the three main questions, our goal for today is really kind of discussing these three main questions is, can algorithms be biased? Why does a chilly climate exist in online courses? And we'll talk about, defining chilly climate. And then talk about ways in which you and the rest of us, we could potentially make our courses more culturally relevant, responsive, and sustainable. Then I'm going to hand this slide over to Albert to talk about the 6 laws of technology.
All right, thank you. So the 6 laws of technology were actually developed by a gentleman by the name of Melvin Kranzberg. He was a technology historian. He's actually looking back right at the height of the Cold War. So that is primarily when he developed these laws. And we say they're laws of technology. Arguably, we probably should call them guidelines, but this is how he called them, as laws of technology, and we developed it. And throughout computer science, these are actually things that we've discussed before, but more on the ethics and philosophical side. And he's got 6 major laws that we look at. His primary one is technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral. And an example I like to give my students with this is when you look at Facebook. Facebook, at its surface, great way to stay in contact with your friends and family. Also a really bad way that collects all your information, sells it off to advertisers. So at the same time, while technology can be proving something good, it's also proving something bad on there. Another law that he has, and he's actually flipping in an age-old term, but he's saying invention is the mother of necessity instead of saying necessity is the mother of invention. And his idea is that tech creates more tech. When you create the smartphone, well, now you need to create the smartwatch. You create Bluetooth, well, now you need to create Bluetooth headphones. Every time you create more technology, you're constantly in this sort of loop where you create more technology. Going back to the wheel, because from his definition, technology is something developed by humans in order to improve our lives. So you created the wheel, now you need to create the cart, because the original wheel was for grinding wheat and things like that. And now you get to create the cart and things like that, moving on from it. Technology comes in packages big and small. Once again, going back to the atomic age, he was actually talking about the atomic bomb all the way down to smaller things of technology at that time on there. And this is sort of a fun one, and this is one of his longer worded ones, is although technology may be a prime element in many public factors and issues, I mean, we're dealing with that today, it is non-technical factors that take precedence in technology policy decisions. So we have all this technology, talk about the internet, but how often are those people making the laws actually take that technology into account when they make the laws about that? Or are they more interested in socio-demographic factors or economic factors than how the actual technology works? And then this one, the fifth one, is sort of self-serving. He was a technology historian. I'll explain a little bit on how I mean on that one. But all history is relevant, but the history of technology is most relevant on that. And the reason why is his point of view is if you study the history of technology, you're also studying the history of humanity. Because we changed when the wheel was invented. We changed when stirrups were invented and cavalry battle. I mean, that actually changed battles at the time on there by the technology that's associated with the time. There's an interesting class we used to actually teach at a high school that I used to be principal of, and it was understanding society through the use of the bow and arrow, because they went all the way back to the development of the bow and arrow and how that changed and how society changed throughout that. So this idea that technology and all that's connected. And then his last law is one that we actually come across the most, at least in the course I teach, is technology is a very human activity. And one of my favorite sayings about this, and this is actually an example that he used, is you had a classical violinist performed a concert, well-known maestro, and after the concert, one of the audience members went up to this violinist and said, "That violin makes great music." And the violinist held the violin up to his ear and said, "I do not hear music coming out of it." And the reason why is the music only exists in concert with the human working with that technology. And when we talk about computers and we talk about working with computers, none of our computers, none of our technology exists without a human working in concert with that technology, thus influencing that technology, and even the human being influenced by that technology, because it's constantly working together in concert in order for it to exist on there. So he very much promoted that technology is a very human activity. He actually started, and I want to get the name exactly right with this one, Society for the History of Technology. And he was original publisher for the Technology and Culture Journal. He's since passed away, but the journal is still being published today, where technology historians go and talk about how technology and humans are connected with each other on that. So a lot of information in there. Most important thing on this is technology is a very human activity. If we can think about that when we think about technology, then we can start having discussions instead of trying to divorce them all the time on there. And always feel free to interrupt and ask questions on this on there.
And I'm just jumping in just because I'm seeing something good in chat. Okay, from Francie and Liz, and basically some discussion about age when it comes to technology. Now, the question we asked was, is there a dominant culture of technology? Which is a very loaded question, and a lot of you guys were absolutely right that you were trying to get us to define it. If you know, we were our own instructors, we would be like, no, you have to define it better. But an interesting thing when it comes to an assumption about technology, and both Francie and both Liz hit on it. Liz, that the misconception that younger people are tech savvy, and Francie mentioning that the culture and some of the design is really points towards, you know, a population, a consumer, a user that is younger. And I just wanted to mention that when I'm teaching technology, I have students read an article by Mark Prensky. It's called Digital Native, Digital Immigrant, and it's such a controversial article. And I'm teaching educators, so they just go all over the place about it, and they all debate exactly what Francie and Liz were putting in there. But anecdotally, having worked with Chris and who happens to be our moderator, he's gotten some grants in accounting to bring lots of technology into accounting classes, and we had to develop something for his students because he had a diverse range of students at the community college, from the 18-year-olds to people who had retired and we're starting a second career and we're taking accounting, or they wanted to start a business, that we had to say, when showing the students technology, we had to say to the young students, look, you have to learn this because everybody's going to expect that you know technology. And for the older students, like the 50+ students, we'd have to say, look, you have to learn this technology because everybody's going to assume you won't know how to use it. So just throwing that out there before we go to the next thing. So really great, bringing up that age makes a difference in our assumptions about the dominant culture of tech.
And I'm really glad you point out to that question on the side, because Melvin would actually argue, from what I understand, of course, I don't know for sure what anyone would argue on that, but we're all tech savvy, but with different forms of technology. And so we have this culture that we're assuming that it's always talking about computers and all that, or certain things on computers. But he would say, well, it's all related to technology, so then you dive into that more on that. So it's an interesting thought on that way. And you all are much nicer than my students when I ask this, by the way. My students in class have a much more specific point of view when you ask that about the dominant culture on that regard. So talking about an algorithm, and we're presenting this so we can have more of the discussion on there. An algorithm, and they talk about the instructions, but more importantly, it's usually a set of ordered instructions that is based on what someone puts into the machine. And that is a critical part. Is right now, there is a whole thing about automatic coding versus automatic programming. The argument is computers don't automatically program because you have a creativity element in which you have to build this thing in sequential order, and then your order changes based on your logic blocks. So that's just purely defining what an algorithm is when we talk about algorithms. But all our technology, all our programming, all our computers are based on algorithms. And the very most simplest algorithms is often the math algorithms, Pythagorean theorem, right? That's an algorithm. It's a set of instructions on how to change or figure out the angle or the side of a triangle. Sorry about that. Obviously, I know this on there. That's a very basic algorithm, but then everyone relates it to math on that. And the truth is an algorithm is just an order of instructions. A recipe. How do you assemble a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? That's an algorithm. How do you bake a cake? That's an algorithm. These set of instructions in which you follow are algorithms on there.
And Albert, I just wanted to say, and I put it in chat already, but if anyone was at Shay's keynote when he was talking about learner analytics, they are based on an algorithm. And the ones he was talking about specific to his institution, they do not have access to exactly what that recipe is. They know they get a peanut butter sandwich at the end of it, but nobody's nobody's telling them what goes into that peanut butter sandwich. And the advisors, the administrators using it, like they have an idea of what should go into a peanut butter sandwich.
Or if it's chunky or creamy.
Yeah,
or
yeah.
what the jelly is, or
a lot of companies that we're seeing for analytics aren't telling us because they consider it proprietary and they consider that, like their business secret.
Yep, and that's actually, with all algorithms, that is what they protect. In the tech industry, and this was a major change that happened a number of years ago, the most valued commodity is the individual more than the hardware. And the reason why it's really difficult to duplicate the algorithms in which individuals develop on there and be able to follow that path when something needs fixed, you can replace hardware. It's harder to replace that individual that had that creative aspect when developing that peanut butter and jelly sandwich. To decide creamy was better than chunky. First, I'm a chunky peanut butter fan, but either way, determined that one thing is better than the other one when they made that peanut butter and jelly sandwich on that. But basic definition, was there anything else that you all wanted to add to this definition, or does this help set up for what we're looking forward on? So we can go to the next slide, probably. All right, artificial intelligence, it's tossed out a lot, talking about AI and the things that we do with AI. Within AI, there's actually many fields. It's a very, very broad field that's being used on a daily basis in a lot of areas. You may not even realize artificial intelligence is being used. For example, the cruise control in your car is actually it's more your gas pedal using adaptive technology based on how you drive to reduce the amount of gas consumption in some of the fancier cars. It's just one of the many computers in cars. And they're learning from basic situations and learning the right path. Artificial intelligence is also looking at all possible answers and then figuring out what is the best path in that answer. So the top solver for chess, Big Blue, I believe, is top solver. It may have been passed up by this point. But Big Blue's supercomputer, one of the best chess solvers, actually looks at every possible outcome and then determines the best path by looking at every possible outcome. Very slow and very inefficient way, problems get exponentially harder, and that type of search falls apart. So then we enter machine learning, which is a subset of artificial intelligence. That's the one you've probably heard of more, in which we use data to teach machines how to react to certain situations. So we have an algorithm in there where we're providing data and we're saying, based on this data, you should learn how to react to the situation. Feed it a bunch of images, we teach it that it's a cat or dog. Machine, tell me, is this a cat or dog? And it pops out and says, yes, this image is a cat. Yes, this image is a dog, because you have trained me with tons of cat and dog images. And I've actually worked with cat and dog data set. It's a very famous data set. It's one of the first data sets I worked with in my machine vision background. And I can tell you Chihuahuas always look like cats, but everything else looks like a dog on there, on that regard. But beyond that, you have your cat and dogs, and they split up pretty well on that, but it's just one of the things, but we train it to do that. So when you hear AI, most of the examples we talk about are more machine learning, because we're talking about how we have provided information to this machine and set up the algorithm for it to learn, so we can get usually a yes or no answer. Cat or dog? Is this person or that person? Am I doing better in driving or worse than driving? So the end, it's usually a yes and no. There's a range in there, but it's usually a yes or no answer. Do we need to intervene on this student's behalf or not, based on learning analytics? That's where this machine learning and these algorithms tend to come from, and that's usually what we're working themselves to. On that, on some of the, and I believe you have the biases, the next slide. We'll come back to that later on that.
Yeah, I think we have to show this one, right? Helga,
yeah,
you want to set it up?
Yes. So first of all, I guess based on what we were just talking about, everything we've discussed so far, and do you think that? Of course, I get a delivery right when I'm on.
Okay, I'll take it over. Yeah.
My apologies. There you go. Oh.
Helga, I'll talk it. You okay? So if if you press the button, okay, you won't hear audio, but this was popular a couple years ago, YouTube and over YouTube, and this is the racist soap dispenser at Google.
Okay, I think my delivery is complete. And so I guess my question for you all too is, do you think then that algorithms can be biased? And if you want to put, and in this instance as well, like the methods used for machine learning that Albert was talking about, can biases creep into them? And if you please, add in chat if you think they can be biased, or if, you want to unmute yourself, feel free. Yeah, so Darlene put in there that algorithms reflect bias of humans. Yep, absolutely. 100%. Liz put algorithms are 100% biased because they're coded by people who have unconscious bias. Yes. And others who chimed in agreement. So, and especially just in particular on that video, we just saw, I guess, our question, and I think we all kind of can deduce some of the answers, but then is there a normalization of whiteness and masculinity in technology? When Albert asked us to close our eyes, did people envision kind of the software engineer as a middle-class white male? What did you envision? Do you believe that, you know, the normal tech culture or dominant tech culture is white and masculine? And then next, Albert, if you want to talk a little bit more about the AI examples.
I will, though actually, you're all right. I'm going to toss out what my students usually say for the dominant culture, if we're good to that point without giving away too much yet. My students are a bit more, I'll say, very specific. They say the dominant tech culture, or at least a dominant programmer, is this white, immature male who's sitting inside a cubicle that has no clue how to interact with people unless it's through a computer on that.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, that is like across the board. And being a CS person, originally even an RA on the computer science floor at my university when I was an undergrad there on that, that was literally when I walked into the floor, that's what other people told me about the floor on that. And it was interesting that model has carried on for 15 some years on that, that is the image that people first come to mind with the programmer on that. So you all are pretty polite. That was usually what my students would say on there. So they're very specific when they have that on that. So moving on to bias in AI and real world examples. This actually comes directly from Joyce Chow at Microsoft, and it's In Pursuit of AI and we have these resources. There's a doc that we have that we share out this that you can find the resource itself. And what they're trying to do is they have an inclusive design in how we design applications. And they really draw out and call out bias in artificial intelligence. And she has put together a series of 5 possible biases to look for when you're developing these applications. Data set bias is one of our more common ones. You'll see this in web cameras that track movements or face tracking technology. And what often happens is we talk about the cat and dog data set. Well, what if I only gave it chihuahuas for dogs? Well, then everything looks like a cat. So I do relate it back to things. Everything looks like a cat in there on that regard because that is a data set you gave it. Now, some of the very first face recognition data sets, and I was fortunate enough to actually work with some of the primary data sets, so I got to see this, were developed because they basically sent an email out, and I believe it was MIT, don't quote me on that, I believe it was MIT. They sent an email out to the graduate students there and undergraduate students and said, hey, we're developing this new technology. We need people to come to this building and get their picture taken. Well, the vast majority of people who volunteered were white college-aged males. And so the original training data sets for face recognition was trained on this data set. And no one really sat, and this data set was shared out and everyone signed waivers saying, yes, you may use my face for training all your different data sets. So all this vision recognition and face recognition technology was developed on a data set from a group of people in Massachusetts going to school on there. And I believe they even took the pictures in the winter. So we're going to even add to the point of being white males in college in the winter over in that area. And this was a primary training data set until things started changing throughout the years. Well, when they first started coming out with algorithms, they're trying to figure out why was this the only group of people it recognized? Well, based on how you train it. So that's known as data set bias. Associations bias are actually usually based on the programmer. It's also based a little bit of other information that we feed it. You used to see this, they're getting a bit better. If you ever use Google Translate, it says help us with this translation. That's intentional to try and overcome this association bias on there. But when you translate languages, we're a gender neutral language for the most part. Other languages are not. So if you're translating the word pilot, do you translate it to a female pilot or a male pilot? The association bias is going to say, well, all pilots are male, so we're going to translate it to a male pilot, and all flight attendants are female, we're going to translate that to female, which is not true. We know that's not true, but this auto translator is making that assumption on there. And some of the first natural language processing was actually translating. It was actually translating Russian during the Cold War on that, but they had these biases built into it as they were going across the different languages. Now, I know nothing about Russian, so I can't talk about that, but I know it stems all the way far back to those original translators on there. Automation bias is usually an algorithm bias. Usually it's a programmer that's not thinking about it. Snapchat is a great example of this one. Snapchat has this beautification photo filter. And first thing it does is lighten your skin. It makes your eyes a bit more noticeable, pops out your eyebrows and things like that on there, what they do. Very European notion, which isn't necessarily American, because different regions in America, if you actually study beauty, understanding of beauty, they actually have different ideals of beauty on that, but a very European notion of facial images. And then someone like my partner, who's already very, very light skinned, she will use it and it will white her out. Like quite literally, you found it really amusing. If she tries to use that filter, it whitens her out completely, depending on the background and what she uses. But this was the assumption that this is what everyone should look like to be beautiful. And this is built right into Snapchat. So they're forcing not only a very specific culture, not even necessarily the culture for their dominant audience, but they end up forcing this very specific culture because their algorithm is biased on their beautification filter. Interaction bias is the one where humans are not always very nice. Especially when some of the first language recognition algorithms came out, the different chat bots, one of them called Jabberwocky. It's one of the foundations is actually trying to beat the Alice algorithm on there. So Alice in Wonderland, Jabberwocky, creative names you come up with. People started training it, and the first thing they started doing is training it with cuss words and sexist language and racist language. And they told people, hey, this is a bot inside of a chat room. It's trying to learn from humanity how to respond to different situations. And the first thing humans went in there is tried training it purposely wrong. That's interaction bias. So humans aren't always very nice. But unfortunately, if we just say, hey, we're going to trust all of humanity and say they will train it right, that's not necessarily true on there. A more up-to-date example is there's a gentleman who's researching how to predict hate speech before it fully happens, like in Facebook when different conversations and things like that, and they're using Twitter as actually what he's using, and they're tagging it. And when I met him, he's actually interviewing at our university. I said, well, how do you deal with situations where the tweets you're looking at have hate speech built into them, and the person tagging it doesn't assume it's hate speech, so it's going to get tagged as non-hate speech? And they said, yeah, they actually ran into that first. They had to figure out a whole system on how to collect that information and have multiple people look at every single tweet and have a gold standard they looked at so they could actually catalog that. Else they would have had interaction bias just simply because most Twitter isn't very nice on there. And then the last but not least is we've seen this during, we talked a lot about this during the last election, presidential election. It's coming up again. And this is confirmation bias. People like. And this is very similar to psychology bias. There's psychology confirmation bias and computer science confirmation bias. They're the same idea. We like. And the reason why is most of our algorithms, especially let's say you buy something on Amazon, we want to sell more things like that, right? Amazon's based on selling things. You buy something like it, like, hey, you may need this, or maybe you need something associated with this. You bought this, and everyone who bought this also had to buy this in order to fix this. On this, they want to sell things. These same algorithms are selling links and information to you. So where it came up was in Facebook, you post an article and you start getting articles like that article, or we show friends that you tend to have more in common, so you interact more, you want to use the application more. And so they are purposely not showing you the things that may cause you not to use the application, because that one friend on your list that posted things you don't like, so you're not going to want to log in and deal with it. Let's not show that friend on there. This ends up building a confirmation bias, and you will see companies are trying to fight it. Right now, if you post a link to Facebook that is really, I don't want to say one side on an issue, but is really strong towards one spectrum of an issue, you'll sometimes start seeing an advertisement for the exact opposite. That's intentional because they're trying to break confirmation bias on there. For better or for worse, it's actually really hard to do because we just talked about the machine learning algorithms are designed to do yes or no. Well, do you go flip all the way to the no, or can you find some spectrum in there that's closer to the yes but pushes you this way without getting the whole full other side, and then you just start fighting back and forth because it's completely different than your point of view on things. So that actually ends up being a bit harder to do and keep with the algorithms, but they're trying. But those are the main five biases they tend to talk about. And in inclusive design within Microsoft, they say, hey, anytime you develop an ML algorithm, check to make sure it's not following in one of these biases on there.
Okay, this is something I threw out there. Quite honestly, 2019, 2 senators have tried to put in the Algorithm Accountability Act of 2019. And again, would require large companies to audit their machine learning and artificial intelligence tools for bias. I did not believe that it went to the floor of the Senate. You can look it up if you want to. There's some good language starting to talk about this, and what we as citizens can start thinking about, or maybe asking actually our technology companies to do.
Okay, thanks, Kate. I wanted to talk a little bit about just real world examples of kind of a worldwide sort of recognition of biases in technology. And this one in particular is a memo written by a Google software engineer called Google's Ideological Echo Chamber. And it was a memo that a software engineer had written during the time that Google was actually being sued by the Department of Labor for gender bias pay inequality investigation that the Department of Labor was conducting. So this gentleman by the name of James Damore, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, Damore, basically sent out a memo to Google, I believe organization-wide, that not only argues that women, argues that women are underrepresented in tech, not because they face bias and discrimination, but because there are inherent psychological differences between men and women. And his table of contents actually include one bullet point that is possible non-bias causes of the gender gap in tech, and one is personality differences. In reading sections of that stating that women are just more emotional, things like that, the classic stereotypes, and that men just simply have a higher drive for status than women do. So men tend to succeed and are promoted more in tech, according to him. And then I just also wanted to state that during this whole time that Google was being investigated for pay inequality by the Department of Labor, and they were fighting it for years. I believe the investigation started in 2015, and then finally in 2017, a judge had determined that Google did not have to provide further documentation. The reason Google was being sued is they were refusing to send, pay documentation all the way back to, I believe it was like 1998. So a judge ruled in favor of Google. Shortly then, after in 2018, the current administration introduced what they call a transparency directive. And as you can see, I'm putting air quotes into the transparency around the transparency directive, because it's a very misleading term, but basically what it does is that it mandates that the Department of Labor now has to send any organization notice that they will be investigated. So historically, the Department of Labor under the previous administration had actually been doing a lot of investigations. Any government contractor has to meet certain practices to eliminate discrimination, and the Department of Labor was opening a lot of investigations, and Google was not the only tech company that was being investigated. Oracle was another one, but they had actually managed, I think in 1 year, I can't remember what year exactly, I think it was like 2017, about $22 million in back pay for employees who were being had pay discrimination in their workforce. So it was actually a pretty awesome initiative by the Department of Labor. And one thing I just wanted to point out, I don't know if anybody else has followed any of these lawsuits. Google had then subsequently had a lawsuit filed from other women in the company afterwards for pay discrimination, as well as there was also one filed by a man who believed he was fired for age discrimination, coming back to the idea of age and dominant tech culture. I had a really difficult time in my research leading up to this, finding out what the results of these suits were. Trying different search engines, it was definitely a little more limited on Google and Chrome. When I used other search engines, I definitely got different results. But so I think some of these are still potentially in progress, or I don't know, settlements were made, but I had a difficult time finding out what the kind of end result of these lawsuits were. But this is something I think is important to talk about in the idea of like how, you know, when we're thinking about how culture and biases can creep into our technology, I think this is a really great example of potentially what the cultures are in tech companies, how, you know, it's widely known that people are, you know, protesting and actually bringing lawsuits against some of these companies because of discrimination. And let's see.
Unfortunately, sometimes they actually find loopholes about all of these lawsuits. I took that by experience. I used to work for Cisco in Colombia, and I was part of the team of engineers that actually take care of the whole platform of the network that of the specific area that we were working. And they came out with this wonderful idea of restructure. And there was only 2 women in the department, well, in the team actually. It was myself and another lady, and we got bumped down to technical support. So that was the way for them to actually have excuse to pay us less than the engineers, and to actually, you know, say, well, you guys are women, so you actually are more fit to be in customer support than actually working as an actual network engineer. Unfortunately, back in Colombia, we don't have any of these systems in place that we can do all of the sues or actually come up with something to put, you know, to put a word out for us to step up. So we just had to swallow our words and just do what we could to do this. But that was the principle was because actually Karen, that was her name, and I we were being paid less, and Karen was actually the one that brought it up. And when Karen brought it up, 2 weeks later, they told us, oh, we're actually going to go through a restructure. And that's when they came out with the restructure. And what they said to us, I was like, oh, actually, you're getting paid more than a usual technical support person. So they were trying to make us feel better, quote unquote, better, because we were getting paid better than other ones. But no, what they did is bump us down from being engineers to just technical support. And that way they can actually excuse themselves for that.
Yeah, and I think, Diana, that's an excellent segue into what I wanted to talk about next, which is chilly climate, defined as, you know, subtle ways in which women are often treated differently at work and in the classroom. So before I moved, I'm just going to tell a couple of personal stories on that too, as a woman who's worked in technology. Is before moving back to Colorado, I lived in San Francisco for several years, part of which that time was working for a startup, like a large percentage of the San Francisco population. And I was working in the educational realm, teaching people how to use the application, things like that, in tech support. And I remember somebody sent me an article on the way that women are funneled into support roles and customer-facing roles in technology, even if they have the computer science background, the engineering background. And I looked up, I was at the office and I looked up and I looked around, and that's when it struck me that every single woman every single employee that was customer facing was a female on in this team that I worked on. And then all of the engineers were male, and I believe across the board we were all white as well. And I was just sort of taken aback at the real world kind of experience that I was having that goes along with that. And then also in my, you know, previous positions, working in kind of the learning management system support. I did often get male instructors who, if I didn't immediately know the answer or how to support them, would ask for my male, a male counterpart or another male. It was never for another one of my female coworkers. It was always asking for a male, and definitely making me feel like their frustration with me potentially is based on gender. And then building on that kind of idea is the idea of the poison chalice, which is in trying to kind of adapt to chilly climate, to prevent chilly climate. Sometimes it's a form of help where instead of helping you work through a problem, the instructor, the faculty, or whoever, coworker, colleague, is instead just completing those tasks for you, for the student, for their colleague. And I definitely had that scenarios as a videographer as well, being the only female videographer, and having experiences where if I'm struggling with a piece of equipment or something, my male counterpart's coming over and just be like, here, let me do it. Instead of help me understand or help me walk through it, just kind of wanting to do it for me. So I've definitely had a lot of those experiences as well.
Unfortunately, it gets a little bit worse, and I don't want to talk down on white people. When you are not white, I am definitely not white. I am Latina from Colombia, and I am a woman. When I started working in the past institution, I'm not going to say names because I just really don't want to. The past institution, when I started working there, I was 24 actually years old, and I was teaching computer science because that's my background. I'm an engineer. Obviously, in a community college, you have a wide range of ages. You have from 18 all the way to people that are already retired and I'm trying to look for a different career. My first day of class, a lot of the male students that were mostly male asked me what was I doing at the front of the classroom. I told them what was my role. When they find out that I was the teacher for that class, they got extremely upset because I was just a kid from a third world country and walked out of my classroom. So that's definitely something. And not only that, but when you are a female in an environment that is mostly male, you kind of become I don't know, like a sexist trophy for most of them. Honestly, I experienced that a lot as well. For the majority of my male co-workers, I heard them talking definitely horrible things that I could hear them behind my backs. And I had to pass through that, just couldn't say anything because anytime that I tried to express myself, it was just all in my head and I just had to pretty much shut my mouth and keep going.
And we have a request from Kathy to talk. And so Kathy, feel free to say something. I just wanted to say one thing about chilly climate I found in doing my research. Having done the academic research that about the year 2012, 2014, they no longer even put the citation chilly climate. It's just assumed that in computer science that there is a chilly climate. And Kathy, please come on, unmute your mic, or if you can't, we'll get Chris to.
All right, can you all hear me? Yes?
Yes, sorry.
Okay,
we did
great. I had no idea that you could hear me. So sorry I had to jump in because I can tell that, this can be a sore subject to a lot of female professional. And I heard the previous two speaker about their experience, but I'm here to tell you that that is a fact of what happening, but we have came a long way, from what happened in the past. And I'm to talk about perspective. Okay, so yes, I experience a lot of things like you guys do. I was in bank industry. It was very male dominant, so there definitely a lot of sexism and then also racial gaps. But if you take a look back about 50 years or even ago, a woman cannot even apply for a loan without a male cosign. I think that we definitely came a long way. Will we ever be, like a rise? I don't think so. I mean, just be honest, because of the role the society put on us. We are the one who bear children, and we are the one who pretty much, you know, like care, usually the major caretaker of the children. So that put out a gap with, you know, career advancement in all the area. So unless there is a different societal shift, you know, to change that, to make it acceptable for the man to stay home, be a stay-at-home dad, and help out with that kind of role, I definitely don't see that much a change, you know, huge change in the future. And that's something that we have to recognize and come in term with that. And then also the next thing is I hear a lot of immigrant, you know, or younger professional who've been looked down on. And what I'm trying to tell you is hang on there, because you'll be the leader who also mentor all other female professional in the future, and then lean in each other, because you're not alone. So that's all I had to say. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Kathy. This is another great discussion that you contributed to. Does anybody else, would you like to go ahead and get on mic?
Kathy, I agree with what you said. And we can actually see it now, a day where we are all working from home. I've been in meetings daily. I don't know how many times a day we're in Zoom meetings. And usually when you meet with a male, you know, the male is relaxed, they're able to focus, while I have my 5-year-old and my 8-year-old coming to me, asking me for help for the homework, or fighting, or I don't know, one had a boo-boo. So you see actually the females usually having their kids while trying to work, while the males are just relaxed, waiting there for things to happen. So yeah, you definitely see that comment that you were bringing up nowadays, especially that they're trying to work a full-time job, take care of the kids, and take care of the house.
Yeah, and I think those are both really great points, and I think that kind of goes along with, I think we kind of already discussed this, like why does a chilly climate exist in our courses? Obviously, we have inherent biases that creep into all forms, even if we're working in online and working in technology, right? We make assumptions based on what little data we can glean on who our students are, even in this online context where we're maybe not face-to-face with our students. So I wanted to kind of push forward. Oh, and also I just wanted to take a minute saying thank you to those who are also commenting in the chat box. And thank you for your solidarity. Dina for saying that she was also teaching at a very young age and had a similar experience to Diana. David, thank you for kind of putting in the chat box that he was having doctoral students from Saudi Arabia who are really going back to their own home countries, feeling more kind of stronger, more empowered, and being able to work in educational technology. So thank you for contributing to the positive change that we are seeing, that was commenting on earlier, the progress that we are making. And absolutely, I don't want this to be a doomsday discussion, but progress is being made. But I think the important point here is that we're discussing it and we're aware of it, and we're all here because we're interested in learning how to be that positive agent of change, and helping bring diversity into education, into technology. And it's important because not only as people in education, we recognize the importance of creating a safe and welcoming environment in our courses, being aware of potential ways that we could be perpetuating a chilly climate towards women or minorities or people of color, and taking steps to realize the importance of bringing diversity into technology and technological development. And so now we're going to kind of go into ways that we can do this.
And I see Cynthia said, even in nursing, a female-dominated profession has bias, with males nurses making higher pay than female nurses, and that she had to advocate for to get the pay increase. Yes, it happens. We don't have a lot of time, so we're just going to go over some terms and maybe some things. You can go back to the slides if you have to have these discussions. So we'll go quickly because, yeah, we're running over. Inclusion and the intersection of dominant tech culture. Just rip through the slides, Helga, and then we'll close it. Okay, intersectionality. When you're having these discussions, talk about intersectionality. No single social label, female, black, bisexual, poor, can ever exhaust what it means for an individual, okay? So it's not just one, it's not just another, it's not just the cross, it's so many different things. Okay, go. Keep going, Helga. Okay, and we have this resource. Kimberly Crenshaw, she is the person who started doing the research on it. She has a great YouTube thing. Please go ahead and watch it. Keep going, Helga. Multiple sources of identity. Okay, but just think about the marginalization is what or who is obscured and what or who is not in focus. Keep going. And what we really want you, while we didn't get to discuss this, what we want you to really think about and discuss and figure out, and we don't have the answers any more than Shay did with the keynote, is think about how do you make your course culturally relevant. That doesn't mean just celebrating heroes and holidays. It means actual cultural relevancy, culturally responsive, so you know who your students are and it's actually geared towards them, and then sustainable, doing things that help sustain them, their language, their culture, their identity. So we are going to have to leave now because I got the notice. And if you're doing critical studies in education, it's always asking the questions: who benefits, who does not, and what can be done about these inequalities. So we're just going to leave it there. Okay, Helga?
That's good. My apologies. I was thinking we had until 2 for some reason. So.
All right, everyone. Thank you again to all our speakers. Thanks, everyone, for watching. And please remember to fill out your survey form. And we'll let you head out to your 2 o'clock.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, sorry, guys. We need to end this meeting.
I know.
We can't get the other one started.
Okay, goodbye. Thank you.
Bye.